Thanks. Thanks, Liz. Okay, so good morning, everybody. Meeting of the steering committee of the Vermont Climate Council. We've got 3 steering committee members here. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. The agenda and everything is online as usual. Let me just drop it in the chat. And I'm happy to share that on the screen right now, too. Oh, good. Here comes Kelly. Welcome, Kelly. We're just getting going here. Okay, so our main goal today is to really focus on our next council meeting. Let's look at the agenda, make some improvements as needed, and let's think about what needs to happen between now and then and when we want to have draft materials posted. So that's this first set of conversations. Then related to that is just making sure we're all on the same page, how we want to shepherd this thing out the door, like what's our process for using our decision-making protocol, and how we're going to do that on this package of content, these draft priority actions we want to get out the door on the 31st. Just so as a steering committee, you all feel comfortable how we're going to be handling that process. It's sort of a decision you need to make as a council about letting this stuff see the light of day. And then the final thing we need to do before we finish up is all signs point to a need for a meeting in April. Right now, there's no meeting on the books. There's an expectation, and thanks everyone for who've signed up to participate in some of the public meetings. But at least 2 things need to happen. We'll talk about that at the end of the meeting. So let's not finish the meeting without talking about April. Any questions or amendments or friendly amendments to this agenda for today? Okay.
Looks good.
Thanks, Jared. All right, so minutes are here linked as always. I'll give folks a moment if they need to click through. Any questions, concerns about the minutes from last time? Does anybody need a little more time? Sorry, Sarah, you came off mute.
Yeah, I'm all set with them, David.
Okay, great.
They look good. They look good to me.
Okay, wonderful. All right, so let's consider those approved. All right, so let's jump into this. I'm just going to keep clicking through here. So I popped this on the page. I haven't talked to Liz Amler and Jane about this, and based on our conversations in our last council meeting. So let's walk through and see how this is working for us and how we might shift this as needed. Really, our objectives here are agreeing on this draft content that we want to shepherd out the door in early April. Jane would like to make sure folks get an update on the technical modeling and the timing on that and what's available, what's not available, when it's available. And then we wanted to make sure if we're going to meet in April that everybody's on board with that. Although I would say you as a steering committee can actually make that decision. It's more perhaps informing. All right, so that's what we see as objectives. The flow of it, I could see, as usual, starting with any comments that come in since our last meeting. Then spend a good chunk of time on the cross-sector mitigation, which we didn't get to earlier in the month. And then we need to spend a chunk of time going through revisions based on the notes from our last meeting. And also as part of that, we didn't make a decision on biomass. We need to do that as well. So if you look at that, that's like 11, a little past 11:10 up to 12:40. So the whole thing is an hour and a half to do all of that. So that's ambitious. My thought is let's spend that hour and a half with a little bit more time focused on the cross sector, which we haven't even touched into, although we did get a special meeting on Cap and Invest, which is very helpful. Do a break in public comment, and then come back. Any nips and tucks we need to do, and then for a decision of like send it forth, right? And that's what we need to talk about is how we make that decision. And so we give ourselves another half hour after public comment for that to send it forth, and then save a little bit of time at the end for a briefing from Jane on the technical modeling, and then a tiny bit of time on next steps. Jared?
Thanks, David. I think in terms of any thoughts I would offer on the, main section of this agenda starting at 11:10 and then continuing at noon, I think it would be helpful if hopefully it doesn't seem like skipping ahead, but I think in terms of how that might go, I think it could be helpful to agree on where we want to end up in terms of finalizing draft content. I can kind of imagine two different approaches, and I'm curious what others are imagining. One is what I think we've kind of done to date. It's kind of been a mix of these things. On the one hand, it would be we just say the draft recommendations as they exist, draft priority recommendations are what are going to go out for public comment, recognizing that they are subject to further revision, that we are seeking public and stakeholder input, and that the final recommendations will not occur until later. And we just kind of provide that kind of openness and flexibility. I think the other approach, which it sounded like we were moving towards in the last meeting, is people wanting to be clear up front, and when we send these priority recommendations out, which are consensus recommendations versus which have some differences of opinion. And I feel like if we're going to take that latter approach, it's going to need some really careful facilitation and advanced preparation. Like, I think what we would need to do is have a numbered list of all of the priority recommendations and tell each counselor to come prepared to say, these are the ones I'm good with to go as is. These are the ones I have concern about, so that we're kind of saying, okay, here's the list of consensus priority recommendations, and then here's the group where there's disagreement within the council, and then do we have to do straw polls or something like to gauge a sense of that? Feels like it would, I mean, I can see an argument where that would be a little premature at this point, and it would take a lot of time. And so, I can see the benefit and the value of it, and I'm happy to hear someone kind of make a case for why that's valuable at this point. But my sense would be, given the length of time we have for this meeting, where we're at in the process, we kind of just do a broader statement, like, we're going to get these priority recommendations as far along as we can as a team, as a council, to go out for public comment, but noting importantly that, without identifying which ones, not every recommendation yet has consensus, and all of these recommendations will be subject to further review and revision as we continue our process and as we hear feedback.
Yeah, Jared, I'm really glad you laid out those sort of like two pathways on it. I think that's a helpful characterization. I'm curious, other steering committee members, if you come to a similar conclusion as Jared, which is, probably in the time we have, and we're probably that option one. I will note that you did, as a council, agree on the caveat language last time, right? So you have some caveat language, but I'm curious, other steering committee members, when you think about how Jared's laying that out. Secretary Clark?
Yeah, I think it makes sense what Jared is saying, but also thinking back to reviewing the action items from the last meeting and thinking it was helpful when some of the items indicated it was not a consensus for the group. So there may be, I don't know if like there's a combination that when we clearly know that there's not consensus, but agree that I don't think we will have time next week to go through everything.
Right. Right. And
Yeah.
Liz Miller, yeah, I'm interested because you're one of the people who are like, ugh, this one,
Yeah, well, I was actually trying to flip through what we did last time while I was trying to multitask to remind myself the answer to this question. But didn't we look at a mix of priority and all recommendations at our meeting last time? Or did
no,
we
not
only,
really. What we
it
did is
was
we just looked at what we've deemed as
the
priority.
the color things, the flashcards were priority, yeah?
Yeah, anything that made
Okay.
on a
Yeah.
flashcard should have been priority. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I would find it, if I were a member of the public, and we have some here if they want to comment, obviously later, but if I were a member of the public, I would want to know that those priority recommendations have not actually yet been recommended by the council as a whole. I mean, even as a draft, usually a public draft goes out and it is a adopted, it's a public draft of the agency that's putting it out. So even if it's going to change after feedback, it's not because the agency hasn't yet stood behind it. It's because there's further process and feedback to get. That's very different than where we are, it feels like to me. So I would want to be really clear with the public that the priority draft recommendations have not yet been adopted by the council as a whole. And in fact, there are a number of them, it felt like, that were not consensus items.
Yeah, and that gets back to the caveat language. And I wonder if Charlotte or Liz, you have handy from the notes last meeting that caveat language. And Liz, let's take a look at that, make sure that that caveat language is achieving what you're trying to say. Because I think that was why we spent some time on that last meeting. Okay. All right. So in the interest of our time here, it sounds like there's interest in kind of both, or there's interest in making sure that caveat language is nailing it in the way Liz is saying, right? I agree that it feels quite challenging time-wise for us to do a detailed analysis of like level of support for each of these 50-something priority recommendations. I am open to the possibility, though it is a can of worms, if there are particular recommendations where there's like, real concern among some counselors, if we want to flag that. I get nervous doing that because then it's like can of worms. Everyone wants to flag every little thing on everything. So I'm tempted not to open up that possibility and just go with a sort of statement like what Liz says or what Jared said. Just for our
Yeah,
own sake.
my only concern there, David, is that there's almost two level we've got two levels of concern. One is that the council as a whole hasn't, fully done what we've just talked about. The other is that some of these that are couched as priority recommendations aren't consensus even from the subcommittee recommending them. So, and that gets to Secretary Clark's point. So it might be appropriate to point that out. I don't know. That feels like a different level of that's mattered to the council in the past. I'll put it that way.
Yeah.
Good point.
Yeah. Okay.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but it does seem to me that the biomass recommendation is in a category of its own. I mean, that to me was the only one that I saw come forward where it was explicitly noted that there wasn't consensus and there were kind of three different options put forward by the subcommittee. I think every other priority recommendation that came forward, even if we don't yet have consensus as a council, came forward with the support of a subcommittee. That felt to me, or read to me, like a bit of an outlier.
Yeah.
An important one to note that it's different than the rest, but I don't know how widespread that issue is. I think generally, even if full council adoption it has not yet occurred, I think generally these priority recommendations have the widespread support of the subcommittees that they came up from.
Right. Right. There was some, yeah, I think the cross-sector stuff got a little muddied up on the cards.
Yes.
And that will be fixed this time around. So that, I think that created unnecessary turbulence around what was being proposed as priority recommendations coming out of cross-sector. And that was just a snafu on the priority action cards. Okay, so let me just see where we are on this. It sounds like it would be very challenging for all 50-something to do some kind of level of support. Let's have a caveat language that covers what Liz and Jared and other folks have said. And let me just look in the chat. Does someone throw it in there? Sorry, I realized I was trying to.
Charlotte put it in.
Okay, thanks, Charlotte. Right, so we have this language contains very under discussion for recommendations directors. Just for recommendations directors of the Vermont these council debate these potential actions, seeks public and prior to making decisions on them. These drafts do not yet reflect the final decision by councilors who have had a range of views on them. So it's pretty couched. So I don't know if Liz, if that gets it to where you want to, but that's pretty couched language.
And then in addition, we're assuming we're not sending out draft written things, the draft writing that some of us did, except for, are we sending out some of the, I would call it wraparound chapters, or no?
Yeah, like the intro
Yes.
stuff, or like
Yeah.
with Leanne,
And
chapters and stuff like that.
Right.
Yes, if they are ready-ish, right? And so I think for that, the only way we can send that out is, again, have extreme caveat language to say the council has not reviewed these chapters and offers them as a draft for, blah, 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 right? Because you as a council don't have time to review all that stuff. And so I think if you're comfortable, we'll make a similar caveat for that would go on each of those chapters. And then it's sort of leave it up to Jane and Liz and company, see if they're ready for prime time, and if they're not, they don't go out this round.
So we'll probably will counselors have like a proposed full, here's the public draft we're thinking of giving people before we sit down at that meeting?
Yeah, I think what we need to put online, yes, and I think this is it. It's like, how do we prepare for this thing, right? So I think what needs to go online several days before this meeting, which means it needs to go online like this Thursday, would be an updated set of priority actions based on the comments from our last meeting and fixing the cross-sector stuff. And I know that there's been some tweaking on cross-sector even since the Cap and Invest conversation. And any other chapter that would go out, it should be posted online as well, I feel like. And so it shouldn't be like, oh, we got it in April 4th and it's good to go. I feel like there needs to be, you all need to know what's going to go out or not go out. So Jane isn't here on the call right now, but Liz Amler, chime in if you feel like that's like way off.
Well, I mean, we have the drafts for almost everyone at this point that was due March 1. So I think it'd really be up to the counselors who wrote them whether or not they are ready to put that out to the public. But I mean, otherwise we have them. I defer to them because I wouldn't know whether or not they're comfortable or not unless I ask them.
I did one of them, and I can tell you I've literally gotten zero feedback. In other words, right now we would just be putting out Liz Miller's initial draft, which doesn't feel like a public draft.
And would you want feedback from the rest of the council? Like, do you want that to be dedicated time in a council meeting to look at it?
We could stage it like we've done for other things where the subcommittee, makes it easier on the council by looking first. Okay. And that might be the thing to do, but either way, it just hasn't happened, at least for that. And I believe that's true. I have not seen other cross-sector sections. You know what I mean? Like for purposes of, So that's the status of that subcommittee.
Okay.
Sarah?
I was wondering, and if I've got this wrong, please correct me, but just kind of the updates that we discussed at the Climate Council meeting, will those be incorporated into what we review for Monday? So I was assuming that we would see drafts of that before Monday's meeting. Okay.
But the trick is getting it all done in the next 3 days, right? And that's what we're trying to do. There's an action item list posted on here. I've done a slightly updated version of that action item list that tries to really assign tasks to folks. And we're going to need counselors and staff to like really lean in the next 3 days to make sure we get all those updates done.
Yeah, that's what I was looking at, David, was the action items from last meeting.
Yeah. So Liz has sent those around to staff, and there's been some communication with counselors. I think coming out of this meeting, we just need to lean in and really put a Wednesday deadline on all this stuff so that we're able to post it ahead of the meeting.
And then
Jared?
should we add, if we're trying to put the chapter drafts out, should we add to the action item list any actions required for the draft feedback review as well as the chapters? Not just the party actions?
Yeah, I am. Yes, I am nervous that we not get distracted on long reading assignments in the next few days, because I would love to focus everyone's attention on the priority actions and making sure we're getting them in the right place.
And that's not the objective then, to get feedback of the chapter review, because I'm just not sure when else it would happen.
Yeah.
We don't
I'm
include it in that
interested in
action
steering
unless.
committee. Yeah, I think it's an interesting dilemma, steering committee, of like, we had this vision of getting the wraparound, what we're calling the wraparound chapters, the intro chapters, out as sort of part of the story that you put out as a draft to the public. And it's just been challenging to find time with the council to do any kind of review of that. So I'm curious how much of a priority, steering committee members, it feels for you over the next literally few days to push for review of, Liz's chapter, Leslie Ann's chapter, or the other ones that got written.
Just before folks answer, my question wasn't about the introductory chapters. It's about like what Liz Miller and I were talking about, like electricity chapter and like so on, like including that in action item list for like feedback.
Oh,
If that's the objective, to get feedback and get those drafts ready to go for the public input sessions. So like, we're just not including that.
That feels unachievable to me personally.
Okay.
So
yeah, okay.
I obviously I'm one person on this call, but that feels like a lot given what we saw in the last meeting and the amount of material we were able to get.
Yeah. And Liz, when you made a mention like, oh, I was the author of that chapter, were you talking about the subject matter electricity chapter? Or are you talking about some other chapter you wrote?
Yeah, no, I mean, and that's like minor, and I think the authors were just willing to take on literally, at least I'll speak for myself, initial drafting. Nothing I did felt like it was going to be suddenly launched to the public. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
As opposed to reviewed by colleagues and considered and edited and decided on by, at least the subcommittee level. Yeah. I just fully transparent. It doesn't feel like a process that's ready for prime time.
Yeah. Yeah. Certainly those subject chapters, are not ready yet. Jared?
So my sense, and I know that different chapters are in different places and serve different purposes, but my broad recollection of where I thought we had ended up in the last council meeting was to say, we don't want to overwhelm the public in terms of like what we share for advanced review or try to introduce at the public engagement session. So let's really focus those on the draft priority recommendations and not get out those chapters for kind of like official public comment. I mean, I do think that there are people who are going to want to review the substance of those chapters and for which feedback would be helpful and welcomed. But I do think that it probably makes sense for that to proceed on a different timeline, where I think exactly as Liz said, it's like, okay, we've got the initial drafts of all these chapters. Let's first make sure that we've collected the feedback from subcommittees in the council, and then it could go, there could be a review draft, in May or something that has all of the chapters. But that for right now, it seems like people really want to focus on the substance, not like the written product that's going to be something that's closer towards the end.
Okay. Yeah. Sounds great. I'm just in the interest of time right now, it seems like that's aligned. That's aligned with exactly what's in the minutes from our last meeting, Jared. So that's good. And for the materials that get posted for our meeting on Monday, an updated version of the draft priority actions that incorporates notes and changes from our last meeting and the most recent cross-sector is mission critical. Like that needs to get up and be up, I would say, by Thursday, unless you as a steering committee want a different time. In addition, anything else that may get put out as an introductory chapter, great, we could post that as well. And as a council on Monday, if folks are like, oh yeah, that's fine to go out with the caveat language, great, we can do that. Certainly not the substantive chapters that would lead in, that are accompany the actions.
With the distinction that some of those chapters are already available for
Oh,
public,
yeah.
but we're just not promoting them as such. But if
Correct.
really
They're
want
all online. Yeah.
yeah.
Anybody can look at them. Yeah, they're on the page from our meeting 2 Mondays ago. Okay. In terms of the agenda, and I just dropped it, but I can put it back up. Any other thoughts on the agenda? Because I think that was a helpful framing conversation we just had. But in terms of how we're spending our time, did that look okay?
The only other thing I noted that I'm just going to say it. We've had a comment many times that having some legislative update at council meetings is helpful. So I'm just putting it out there that here we are past crossover with month-ish to go or whatever by the time we sit down together. Folks may raise that. So it may be important to have at least a few minutes of somebody updating. But
I wonder if Jane's not here, so I feel bad assigning, but it's like, I wonder if that's like a memo. Liz, I wonder if there's we could do just a real quick memo. Hey, this is what crossed over. This is what happened to crossover. These are the things that are being looked at. Like nothing's been decided, right? So it's just,
Right.
I wonder if that's an efficient way to do that.
Good, unless council, you want an opportunity for council to ask questions on anything, then there will be time in the meeting, but otherwise I think a memo makes sense.
Okay.
I like that idea. I also think that in addition to kind of any substantive updates around, where different bills or proposals stand, it may be of interest. I know that a number of members of ANR and the Climate Action Office and then individual counselors have been invited to testify on questions. And so it might be good to just summarize, who testified where and provide links to that testimony and those recordings for folks who are interested.
That's nice. Yep. Okay.
I know, for instance, Councilor Cowart and I testified last week in the House Energy and Digital Infrastructure Subcommittee, as did Secretary Moore and Julie. And I imagine that I haven't been able to keep track of it all, but I imagine that there's other testimony that's being invited and provided as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right. Liz Amler, let's see if we can pull that together. I mean, Jane's been spending a fair amount of time testifying as well.
So I'll connect with Jane on that. Yeah.
And what we know of testimony of counselors, and counselors can supplement with if they've been doing things we're not aware of. Okay, great. Anything else on the Monday agenda? All right. As we saw last time, it is hard work to do this in the short time frame. So we're going to have to figure out how we efficiently work our way through because we just don't have a ton of time. So I'll just note that and hopefully all of us can, particularly if we do the kind of framing we just did and say this is our approach, folks. Hopefully that allows us to get through. All right. Next on our agenda right now, give me 1 second. Let me pull that back up. We were going to do a touch of public comment, and I think we were going to do that at 9:10. And so I wonder, I'm just going to show, so the action list is posted online, and I just want to show just a slightly different version of it that tries to get at this. Give me 1 second. Sorry. Rats. I don't have it handy. But essentially, there's a lot of work to do, and we need some counselors for some help. So, like, we need Joey signed up to do like a whole new thing on a finance recommendation, and we're going to have to really make sure that we're supporting her to do that. We need to make sure cross-sector finalizes exactly what their priority recommendations are in the next day or two, right? Leslie Ann agreed to get a K through 12 priority action and sort of overall look at the balance of that. And Chris Campany and Andrew are going to create a new priority action around a rural, what was it? It was a sort of hazards planning approach or something. I don't have it on the top of my head. So those are all things that desperately need to happen. And so for those of you who communicate with your fellow counselors, it would be helpful for all of us to be weighing in aggressively to say, this stuff needs to get done in the next 2 days. And Liz Amler is like the key coordinator and all that. So Liz, shout out if you need any particular help on anything.
Yeah, I mean, I've been in communication with all those folks you just listed out, notifying them of the action item list, and I'll send out reminders so it's on everyone's radar.
Great. Okay. All right. Well, why don't we go over to public comment a little early? And if you've been listening in today, would welcome a comment if you'd like to do one. So let me just pause for a second and see if anyone who's been joining us today is interested in making a comment. Cheryl Joy, go ahead.
Yeah, hi everybody. Do you want it now or do you want it later on about the
The content?
recommendations, the content that's you haven't talked about it yet, so.
Well, we're not going to get into the details of content in this meeting. This is more about process. So, we'll get into content in the other meetings. So one good way to do it, Cheryl Joy, is if you want to do a written thing, and then that can get summarized at the top of the meeting on Monday. That's one way to get into content, I would say. And then you get all the counselors as opposed to just steering committee members.
Okay, I'll do that. Great.
All right.
Thanks.
Thanks, Cheryl Joy. Annette?
Yeah, I wanted to thank Liz for posting in response to my question about the action items that were reviewed at the last meeting. I had looked through the pages on the calendar and I clicked on that one link and it started with transportation and I didn't understand that that was the whole list of flashcards. So if you could put a header on that or do something to indicate that it's not just specific to one sector that's starting out at the top. If I couldn't find it, that means that others won't. The other question I have is there are 3 vacancies on the Climate Council, and could you provide an update on what's happening and filling those? Thank you.
Thanks, Annette. Appreciate that. Good morning. How are you? I just saw you come off camera. Good to see you, Judy.
Hi. I haven't been able to figure out how to raise my hand. I have a new system and it's not working for me. But I have a question about process. When all the steps have been completed, will they go back to the subcommittees to see what their changes were and how they were changed, and can they make comments?
Okay, that is a great question. So the process as it is now is the council is the place where the conversations are happening. And subcommittee co-chairs have been helpful in carrying forward, why subcommittees did certain things and why things are written in certain ways. There's not a step in the process right now for subcommittees to regroup and provide additional input to the council. So that is not part of the steps right now, as of I'm aware. And Jared.
in previous years, there's been significant changes and there's been outrage on the committees because nobody had the opportunity to see these changes in advance unless they went to all the various meetings.
Yeah. Jared, did you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I was just gonna, my sense of it is broadly similar to yours, David, but a little bit different in that as the recommendations move from draft to becoming finalized, I think there's always been a understanding that the climate council, the appointed climate counselors, and the council as a whole is the decision-making body for what ends up in the climate action plan. But in terms of the revisions that happen to those recommendations, I do think that, you know, as always throughout the process, that kind of feedback and either written comment or comment shared at future meetings is always welcome. So I guess I would just say I don't want to send a signal that further feedback from subcommittee members wouldn't be welcome. It's just that at this point the handoff has happened from the subcommittee up to the council, and there's not going to be a kind of passing back down and back and forth. I think now it's the decision making rests at the council in terms of the process that we've outlined.
Okay, because we had, when we first got our list, we had many things that it said, you know, moving forward, and we asked questions, how is it moving forward? We can't really respond until we know how it was moving forward. And then we got comments where nothing had been done, and we were like, well, how do we put this forward again to bring it to attention of somebody so something can be done? And we never got answers to those things.
Can I ask a clarifying question, Judy? Is that about kind of the status of a recommendation with the council, or what happened with a council recommendation post-action? Because I know that there were many recommendations that were not acted on because, you know, as a council, we have the ability to put together a plan and write recommendations, but for things to move forward, it often takes action and implementation from either executive branch agencies or the legislature that we don't have control over.
Right. They were about recommendations. So we never got an answer. Did the recommendation get turned down from the Climate Council? Did it get turned down from the legislation? Did it just not warrant concern? We had questions about that because there were no answers on the Excel sheet that we got. And we never got answers to those things. So it feels like we're like putting the same recommendation forward again and again and again and again. We're not knowing why and what happened to that recommendation. So it just seems like there should be some follow-up there, so that we know what's happening.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And I think this is a distinction also between things that got lifted up as priority recommendations, where there's quite a lot of discussion about, you know, status and what's happening and why it's a priority recommendation, versus things that are included in the full table, where it may have been listed, you know, when the Climate Action Office did a sort of assessment of where things stand, and be like in progress or da-da-da, and they list it. And some spreadsheets had a lot of detail and some had less detail. Those things will continue forward in the full list of actions in the full Excel, unless the subcommittee decided to get rid of them.
I see that you have a full page of discussion points from the Ag and Ecosystem Committee. I also don't see anybody here from there except me, and I can't stay the entire time. So that means if nobody shows up, we don't get feedback into your discussion.
Sorry, I'm trying to track, Judy. You're saying the action items posted from the last council meeting?
Yeah, all of the items that you have
Yeah.
listed.
Yeah, so we're not working on those in this meeting. Those are
Right.
getting worked on by staff and by co-chairs and counselors who said they would help out with that. So that's happening, and an updated version will get posted, and then we'll get in the substance of that in the next full council meeting, which is Monday. So
Okay.
we're not going into content today.
I understand that, but we're not, the Ag and Ecosystem Committee is not going into content with that either. We're not given the opportunity to uplift or defend or explain any of these points that you have a question on.
Right. So I want to be conscious of the time of the steering committee right now, and I appreciate all these comments, Judy. The pathways, as Jared has said, is there's opportunities for subcommittee members to be commenting throughout this. And Earl's been very helpful, like in last council meeting, provided a lot of comments. And so there's pathways of that, and the co-chairs lifting up the conversation, and the staff that have been involved in that conversation. So all that is happening, and will continue to happen right up until the end of this process.
I'd also say, if it's okay, and I don't know if it's exactly kind of a formal role in this way, but I do think that the counselors who are members of those subcommittees are really important points of communication between the subcommittee and the full council. So I think if there's a question about how recommendations from a subcommittee are being heard and interpreted and responded to by the council, like if it's Ag and Eco in particular, I think it would be especially helpful to be in communication with Jael and Billy and any other counselors who are on that subcommittee, but certainly them as co-chairs.
Okay, and I just want to make the comment that Earl was not verbally able to connect because he can't use Teams. And so he was present, but that was it.
Yeah, he was frustrated that his Teams was not working. That was a frustrating moment. I think he was able to provide quite a bit of written comment, and that was very helpful. And has provided in previous council meetings verbal and written comment. So that, it's really helpful to have subcommittee members involved in providing input in the process. So that's a net plus to have that.
Well, I didn't see very many of you, maybe Elizabeth, at our meetings. And so I think you can understand how difficult it is for us to make our meetings and your meetings.
Yeah. Yeah. I appreciate that. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, folks, for that. And that's helpful. The last two things we need to do as a steering committee today, one is making sure we're clear about the decision-making protocol for you as a council and how you shepherd these things out. I think we've gotten that conversation prepped up nicely with the framing and how we talked about caveat language earlier in this call. But I just want to sort of put us in these different scenarios on Monday of how we're getting sort of you all as a council comfortable saying this is the draft content that's going out the door. So we have a governance document, and that governance document talks about, striving for consensus-based decisions, trying to, figure out underlying interests and see if there's areas where we can find agreement. And if we don't, you as a council can vote on things and shepherd things out that way. And there's a little more detail in the governance document around that. But fundamentally, I'm interested in, like, how do you all envision this happening? And just so that I'm working in a way that feels correct on how we do this. My quick thought on this is that we do what we talked about earlier today, which is have a caveat language that we feel comfortable with. Maybe it's on every page of the draft document or however it works. We're focused on the priority draft actions. And we'd say as a council, we're happy to see this be put out as some draft content with all the caveats. And we don't need to go item by item and make decisions on it. Let's just send it out as a package of 50 things with that caveat. and see if you all are comfortable doing that. That's how I envision it happening on Monday, but I wanted to test with everyone if that feels comfortable for you all, if there's something else we should be aiming to do. Liz Miller?
I think my only hesitancy is just having not seen that there was enough discussion over some of the areas of priority. Obviously, the CSM stuff because of, you know, the way the flashcards were, that's fine. I'm sure that'll get taken care of. But then there were others where counselors had concern about either combining or re-emphasizing or like, you know, edits. So I think until I see how that all lands, it's hard to answer your question, David, whether it's going to be realistic or whether it's going to raise a whole nother set of questions like that, which still may allow us to put something out with the caveat, but will be a, you know, a harder meeting.
Yeah, and I
get
guess,
through.
Liz, my question to you then is like, okay, let's put ourselves in the scenario that, you know, we've used our 2 hours that we have to have a conversation about this, and we still have concerns, or we're like, oosh, like I don't love how this looks. Like, is there another way for us to make a decision in that scenario that you see? That was a question for you, Liz Miller, if you're interested.
I don't know. I'm thinking, I mean,
Yeah.
the answer of another meeting is never a popular one, but
And
I
the
mean,
decision is really to release the draft, right? Is that's the
yes,
decision, and the reality of another meeting in a short time frame is probably unachievable.
tough.
Yeah,
That's tough.
yeah.
You know, the alternative of delaying the draft. I know I and others have raised, you know, given that we have until July, I suppose that's still an option, but it's not a great option. So I don't know.
You put a bunch of public meetings on the books.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Jared?
No, I was just going to say the same thing that you did, David.
Yeah.
That
Okay. Okay. I guess my question for you all as well is, if we get to this place on Monday and we're most of the way there and you're not super psyched about some stuff, and we're like, okay, are we ready to put this out the door? And some folks are like, I don't love it. Are we okay? Like, do we want to vote on that? Do we want to wait and get 100% of everybody on board? I'm happy to activate a sort of voting protocol if that's an efficient way for us to move forward. I just want to make sure that I'm acting in a way that you all feels, you know, within your expectations. Kelly?
I wonder if one option might be that if there's a couple different items that have a lot of pushback and someone basically saying like, I will block consensus on this, that we could have an option to remove it from this draft and put it back for further review before it goes to the public.
I mean,
like
we kind of did that in the last meeting with a couple of recommendations that there was multiple people that raised concerns over, and there weren't responses that kind of led to people wanting to move forward with it. So that does feel right. There's like these different levels, right? I mean, one is I still have questions and concerns, but there's a way to move forward with a belief that we can get to language that will be amenable to folks. There's other recommendations where just the very kind of heart or substance of it is opposed or disagreed upon. And I think if we are clearly at a point where it's the latter for the majority of the council, then it wouldn't make sense to include that moving forward. If it's the former, where some people have concerns, but we think that there's something in that substance of that recommendation that we just need to get the right language around, then I'm kind of comfortable with that going out with that caveat language. But I agree with you, Kelly, that if there's something that and I think we did take out a couple of recommendations like that last time, that it felt clear. I mean, we weren't doing straw polls all the way through, but David was checking, is everyone okay with this, when, you know, a number of counselors said, I think we should take this out, and we did in real time. I think we should.
Although,
Yeah,
can
that
I
was
friendly amend
interesting.
that?
I didn't know we had taken things out
Yeah,
for sure.
Jared, let me just quick say yes, and we actually didn't take anything out. One thing we did is we changed the language on one of them, which was the accounting one, where there was a
Didn't we
recommendation.
also merge some so that some are now not standalone?
I think that was more for ease of understanding rather than
Mhm.
concern.
Yeah. I had the same general understanding as David, and I think there are some, that was going back to my earlier point, beyond just the biomass, that were both more, I don't know if they're a lack of consensus altogether or just, you know, but more concern.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how about this, folks? It sounds like we're going to be very close to being able to get to a place where folks are like, with all the caveat language we're including, this is okay to go out there, right? And if we're not, for some reason, we're really stuck, we'll do a quick check and see if we can change the language of something that allows us to get it out there with the caveat. And if we need to activate our voting protocol as a council to say, folks, let's just do a quick vote here. Is this collection of things okay to go out as a draft with the caveat language? We could do that as a way of not having to drag this out into April and new meetings. So I just want to double check if that's okay with everybody. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Great. All right. So I mean, the key is, as Liz Miller says, like, let's get the content out there so we can read it and understand what we're saying here. All right. Thanks, everyone. And let's hope that we have a nice, smooth ride on Monday and we're able to make progress. So the
was
last,
there also, sorry, we might be bringing this up next, but the land acknowledgement facilitation meeting, was that also going to be scheduled in April?
right. So let's talk about April. That's the next final thing we have to do here. There's two things we see as important in April. One is, and Judy is not here now, but Jane's been communicating with Judy and Earl to update the land acknowledgement, which was, oh, Judy is still here, good. Update the land acknowledgement that was done 4 years ago. And for those who participate in that, Judy led us through a process where, like, it was very meaningful, and counselors like literally went outside and connected with the physical land. And we wrote something out of that. And so Jane asked Judy and Earl if they would be open to leading a similar exercise this time around. And Judy, thank you for being willing to do that. I think you may do it together with Earl, if I understand correctly where that stands. Oh, you're on mute, Judy.
I haven't heard that it would be together, because typically it's a journey that you take, and people have to develop a relationship with the land in order to do it properly. Otherwise, it's just the latest gimmick that colonialists use to look good.
Right. And so trying to replicate what we did last time, I think felt like really meaningful, and what you led us through. And I think we can figure that out, Judy, with Jane, about what that actually looks like. But that requires an April meeting. And the other thing that requires an April meeting would be, or strongly suggest an April meeting would be, to start to go through some of this draft content that we've been pushing off. And so with Liz Amler and with Jane, we've talked about the likelihood of doing a meeting, say on the 14th of April, to do those two things, and it may require more than one meeting, I don't know. But we could plan on a meeting on the 14th, which would be a sort of our normal cycle, but we don't have one then. So I just want to, for you all as a steering committee, you are the right body to say yes to something like that, or to shape it the way you want. So the specific proposal would be to add a meeting on April 14th, do a land acknowledgement piece guided by Judy like we did last time, and then spend a little time looking at some content, written content, and getting some counselor feedback on that. Kelly?
If I recall, the 14th also had a public comment or public input meeting on it. So I don't know if that's going to be too much to ask for the counselors who are registered for that.
It was one of the thoughts we had was like, oof, that could be tough. But we were thinking we'd ask you all whether you think that's too much, or if there's a better day. The following Mondays, you know, Vermont's funny with the school vacation weeks. It kind of like alternates and things, but so whatever works for you all. First of all, do we think we need it? Second of all, you know, we're running out of time here in this meeting, but would that Monday the 14th be the best or some other date? Secretary Clark?
I mean, I think we just gotta, I don't know how these meetings get scheduled otherwise, but they just are on my calendar. So I think we should just pick the time that we think makes the most sense and schedule it. And hopefully folks can attend.
That sounds great. Yeah. Jared or Liz is gone. Jared, any thoughts on this? No?
Nothing additional.
Kelly, when you think about the options, knowing that the 14th, there is a public input session that evening, but do you have a strong feeling one way or the other? What would be a good date for this?
No, I think what Secretary Clark said makes sense. Just let's pick a date that looks reasonable enough and hope everyone can make it.
Right. Okay. So why don't we try, let's say the 14th, and then if we're getting some pushback and people are really wanting to go a different date, we could explore that. But I think let's put it on the books for the 14th, and let's also, I want to make sure that works for Judy, and so that let's plan on that.
What time on the 14th?
I mean, our typical times are like 11 to 2, but you know, that's not set in stone.
Okay.
So in one of those hours, like 11 to noon, noon to 1, 1 to 2, something like that, where we could work on the land acknowledgement piece.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. Okay. All right, folks, we're a little bit over. I think that's it. Anything else, folks?
Thank you, David.
Oh, you bet. You bet. Okay. All right. So we've got a busy couple days. We got to get materials together. We want to get it posted online for counselors by Thursday. So you really have several days to look at this. Monday, we show up. We're focused. We're making decisions. We're getting things out the door. Great. All right. Well, have a good week, everybody. Thanks for your thoughts this morning. All right. Take care.